We're 2/3 of the way through the Reign of Jafar, we're halfway through set championship season, so it seems like the perfect time to do a meta report and check out some decks. So let's do it. So we're on to week 9 of the Reign of Jafar metagame. Fabled is fast approaching, but we've still got a few more weeks left of this metagame, including another 2 weeks of set championships. So definitely plenty of exciting, fun decks to look at. For this week's meta breakdown, we see Amethyst Steel and Blurple there as the top decks of the pile. I didn't look at the graph from this time last set during set championship, but I feel like we ended up with something very similar by this point. A lot of players do enjoy playing Blurple. It is a very, very fun deck to play because of that, taking that to set championship. Steel Song, also I would argue a fun deck, but it's also a deck that does really well at set championships, especially when you have people bringing a lot of rogue decks or a lot of aggro decks. Steel Song can really clean up in those situations. Normally you would expect Blurple to maybe be pushed down a little bit because there are so many Steel Song decks running around, but that's not the case. Blurple's still sticking around, I think, again, largely thanks to the new Monstro we received this set. After that, we have Ruby Sapphire Burn in 3rd place, taking over from the item version of the deck that was seeing a lot of popularity post-Worlds, but Burn is now back there in the big 3. And Amber Steel Aggro also there up top. One thing I should mention is that in Ink decks, Steel Song is kind of differentiated from the aggro version, usually by the inclusion of Whole New World, but there are actually a few different versions of Steel Song floating around, so we're going to look at a couple of different ones, some without Whole New World, but are more that mid-range playstyle versus the aggro. But after the top 4, then of course we have all of the other decks, everything you would likely expect to see on these graphs. I think it's been quite a while since I've actually had to change which of these decks are appearing in the top 10 most represented ink pairings and archetypes, and then others being pushed down to 10% for the last few weeks, the first couple of weeks of set championship. It does tend to be that the other decks are the most popular, lots of rogue decks, people trying out different things, bringing those to their set championships, but it seems that at this point in the set championship season, players are kind of converging around what are probably safer bets to bring to set championship, but there are still a lot of interesting decks, and we're going to look at some very, very spicy decks that actually made some very good results over this last weekend of tournaments. And when it comes to tournaments, we're going to look at just 2 of the larger ones this past week. The first one being the Grand Lorcana tournament that took place in Madrid, Spain. I believe that was a 329 player tournament, so absolutely massive tournament. Lots of very well-known players there. World champion DKP was there, Mayan was there, Speci, a lot of really well-known Lorcana players. Also our friend Wan Culture, you should check out his Instagram because it's some of the most beautiful graphic design you will see in the Lorcana space, so definitely check him out, and he was sharing a lot of footage of that event. And then the other tournament is the Sharp Gaming 5K. That was a 73 player event, but also bringing out a lot of really great players there as well. Mo Shamlin was there, did really well, and had a really solid casting team as well. Liam from the Illuminateers, KT from Lawkeepers Inn, and JDZ Quest, all there to provide commentary, so a lot of fun to watch those games, as much for the gameplay as for the casters there as well, so definitely check those out. And when it came to the Grand Tournament, it was taken down by Amber Steel Aggro. Amethyst Emerald was in 2nd, and then followed behind by Ruby Sapphire Maui Burn. And actually you can see quite a fun representation here in the top 8. Those decks did each represent 2 of the top 8, so really well represented. And then there was also an Amethyst Steel and an Emerald Sapphire, which I'm very excited to look at with you all. And then for the Sharp Gaming 5K, actually taken down amazingly by Emerald Ruby Discard. Not a deck I think was on anyone's radar, but it was brought by the winner Cody Gilbert and also Mo Shamblin as well, and maybe other people in that tournament. But it was really cool because they were wearing their Christmas hats because it was Christmas in July. So another really fun deck that we're gonna be looking at. 2nd place was Ruby Sapphire Burn, and then Amber Steel Song. And again, I did say Steel Song was how it was called in Ink decks, but actually this is an interesting one that doesn't run Whole New World, so it is Steel Song, but it's a slightly different flavor of Steel Song. And then the top 8, a lot less diverse. We had 4 Amber Steel, just showing how powerful this ink pairing combination remains to be. But that was a combination of aggro and Steel Song, so a lot of variety in that ink pairing now, which is awesome to see. And then 1 each of all of the other decks, including that winning deck, which was Emerald Ruby. And let's waste no time to look at this first place Emerald Ruby winning list from Cody Gilbert at the Sharp Gaming 5K. I will say, if you want to learn more about this deck in a lot more depth than I can cover, check out the Illuminatiers this week who had Cody on their show in order to talk about this deck, so you can get a lot more insight. But yes, this is a really fun, really spicy deck. So this is an Emerald discard list, so looking to do something very similar to what we would expect in maybe an Emerald Steel or an Emerald Amethyst discard package. But the main difference here is because it's paired with Ruby, it gives us access to a couple of things. The first one is it gives us access to the new action Undermine, which allows you to make your opponent discard a card and also give one of your characters +2 strength. So lots of utility in that very simple action, which is unlocked by this ink pairing, but it also gives access to a lot of Ruby removal tools as well. And then the plan really is going to be about controlling your opponent's hand through the discard package and also controlling their board with the Ruby cards as well. And then once you've got everything under control, you have Maui Half Shark there as kind of your win condition. Once you're able to set him up, you can recur your action cards to force your opponent to discard. You can recur your removal, which primarily means something like We Don't Talk About Bruno, which of course has that fantastic synergy with your discard package with the likes of your Prince John. And it can really create this engine where your opponent doesn't have the cards or the ink in order to be able to deal with your stuff, and then you can kind of run away with the game from there. There are also some really fun cards in here as well. So we have 2 copies of the Dormouse, which might seem like kind of an innocuous card, but has some really useful utility against things like Rhinos who have that resist, of course. But the Dormouse will allow you to place the 1 damage counter on Rhino, get around the resist, and then allows you to take down Rhino more effectively than you would be able to normally. So definitely in there as tech, I would imagine, but also pairs really well with the Queen of Hearts because you can place the damage counter on the Queen of Hearts and then buff her up to a 4/4 on turn 2, which is really powerful indeed. You've also got things like Cricky in there, so if you do end up needing to kind of use some of your weaker characters, your Ursula, your Dormouse, or your Diablos, you can use Cricky to then challenge down your opponent's stuff as well. So lots of different ways to remove your opponent's threats whilst also kind of dealing with their hand as well. 3 copies of Chip, just a really great card to play on curve if you've been able to get your Prince John down on turn 3. And then also 2 copies of Lilo. You have so many actions in this deck. It's 22 actions, I believe, in total between songs and action cards. So when you're up to that 6 ink and you have your Maui Half Shark down, you can do things like singing Pirate's Life with him, maybe sing Sudden Chill with some other characters, maybe play a Brawl to remove something your opponent's doing. Then you can play your Lilo for free, ready your Maui Half Shark in order to get your Pirate's Life back, or just sing another action. So lots of really fun interactions in this deck. Again, not one that was really on anyone's radar. It's not one of the combinations that people tend to generally play, but we know how powerful the discard package is. We know how powerful Ruby's removal package is, and especially with that Maui Half Shark kind of helping tie everything together at the end. So a really good deck. I played a little bit of it and it's super fun to try out. I mean, fun to play, maybe not as fun for your opponent to play against, but it's great to see innovation, especially as we're this deep into a metagame. So looking forward to seeing more of that. And then next up, we're looking at this first place winning list from Demix, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, sorry, from the Grand Lorcana tournament at Madverse in Madrid. And this is kind of the typical Amber Steel aggro list that we're all very familiar with at this point. A lot of high, low cost questers like your Daisy Ducks, your Pennies, your Piglets, and then a lot of ways to kind of deal with your opponent's stuff as well. You've got the Cinderella who you can set up to kind of take out their threats whilst deploying your own. You've also got Calhoun as well, so if your opponent exerts their characters to challenge yours, then Calhoun can come in and clean them up. And then of course all of the other good things, the Smees, the Docs, the Ladies, etc. But we also do have 2 copies of Goofy Groundbreaking Chef, one of the new legendary cards for this set, and he has a 3/4 questing for Zeus, so decent enough stats, but it's his ability that allows you to remove up to 1 damage from each of your other characters and then ready any character you ready this way. That really has a lot of great synergy with this deck. Often you don't want to be the one challenging down, but you have characters like Mr. Smee, which are kind of building up damage. You have characters like your Rhinos and your Lawrences, so if they do happen to get a little bit of damage on them, which kind of weakens them, then a Goofy could potentially be a way to not only remove that damage, which you know you want to do, but also readying your characters to protect them. So very fun inclusion. Of course, the core of this deck is really solid at this point, but nice to see that you can still throw some things in. And of course, it did have a lot of success this weekend at that really massive tournament, so great job there. The next list is the third place list from the Sharp Gaming 5K, which is Shula Dunce. And as I mentioned at the top of the video, this is Steel Song. It does have a lot of songs in this deck, 16 in total, but it is conspicuously missing A Whole New World, and kind of drawing some cues from the more aggro versions of these lists, so using the Dock as one of your draw engines, Rapunzel as the other one, but also Beast Tragic Hero. There's a lot less Madame Medusa in the metagame. In fact, I don't think any decks are really running her at the moment, which means Beast is pretty safe. If you do end up playing into a Steel matchup, then your opponent either has to remove him in one shot, really, otherwise you'll often get heals from your Rapunzel. So it does kind of put a lot of pressure on your opponent, and if they are using a Lungcame Zeus on him, then it means they're not using it on your Rhino or your Aerial Sonic Warrior, who's also in this deck. But then after that, a lot of the other things we've come to expect in a Steel Song deck. We have the Cinderellas there in the same way with the aggro list to kind of protect your things and help you develop a board whilst not letting your opponent do the same. Rhino, of course, just such a good card, one of the standout cards this set. And then Shula going for a split of 2 and 4 on the Troubadour and Ursula, which I think makes a lot of sense. When you don't have Whole New World, then getting or being able to get an extra card from your Rapunzel is going to be really critical, and Ursula enables that. And of course, your opponent is often going to need to be challenging your things down, because even though you don't have a lot of really aggressive early questers, this deck is a deck that can really snowball quite quickly, just thanks to all of those removal songs in there. And then 4 copies of Be Our Guest, letting you find those key pieces. If you need a Rapunzel to get your heals, then you can use it for that. If you need a Rhino to get you over the finish line, if you need an Aerial to help you control the board. Really fascinating deck. Another one I've had a chance to try out a little bit. Super fun. Really making me reconsider whether I want to bring a traditional Amber Steel deck to my set championship, or I should bring this one instead. But we do have a more traditional version of Amber Steel. Next, this is the 5th place list from Courtney Dembski, and a lot of the same pieces in here, a lot of the control elements, but for the top end, instead of going for the Beast, we have 4 copies of Namari. Not something we traditionally see. A lot of decks really running maybe 2 copies of Namari, a very powerful card, but Courtney choosing to run 4 here, which can be a good choice because Namari is such a great way to help you filter through your deck. She dodges a lot of Ruby's strength-based removal. She is just a difficult target to get down and becomes often the thing your opponent really needs to deal with to prevent you kind of finding the answers you need. 2 copies of Naveen, always really good. Helps out so much in the mirror match as a way of kind of coming back from behind. The same in Emerald Steel. And Courtney is running 21 songs in this deck. So for anyone who's ever frustrated at their Aerial missing when you play her, then maybe you should be running 21 songs to give you more consistency. So we see 2 copies of the Bare Necessities. I actually really like this card. It pairs with Sonic Warrior because you can both be removing cards from your opponent's hand whilst also doing damage. But great if you don't know what you're playing against. You can use this as a way of getting information that you wouldn't have otherwise. 1 copy of Grab Your Swords, great with a lot of aggro decks in the meta. Again, pairs really well with Aerial Sonic Warrior. And 2 copies of Beyond the Horizon. One of the downsides of Steel Song is if you don't find your Whole New World, often the deck will just fall apart because you lack card draw. So Beyond the Horizon is kind of a nice way that can help you both find the cards you need, but also slow your opponent down, especially if they've been drawing a lot of cards. So really interesting list, and great job to Courtney taking down the 5th place at the Sharp Gaming. Next up, we're looking at this 1st place list from Taylor Kearney, who won the Cornerstone Gaming Set Championship. Taylor, supporter of the channel, so I wanted to feature his deck list, and obviously great job to him taking 1st place. He did tell me that this is just a modified version of DKP's Hyper Aggro list from Worlds. The difference is he removed the, I think it's Flotsam, the 3-cost warded Emerald card, and instead put Lady to add some more explosive log in and just help play to the board. Other than that, it's all the cards we have seen in that list, and we know that this can be very, very effective, especially going first. So if you are comfortable winning coin tosses or dice roll, then a very good deck for you. But I know set championship season, a lot of players will kind of gravitate toward hyper aggro lists. They're often a lot less cognitively demanding because you kind of have a very linear game plan that doesn't really require you to be too reactive to your board. And I think this is actually a really solid hyper aggro list. It's got all of the aggression with the amber cards, but it also has the kind of the disruption and the ward advantage of Emerald. So you can use Ursula, to protect your characters. So if you've established your Olivia Flavisham and you know your opponent only has so many ways to answer them, you can use You can use Ursula to then remove those answers. Hera and Prince Philip, there is these warded characters that dodge the steel removal, dodge a lot of ruby removal. So unless your opponent is running something like Grab Your Swords, or they're running a big Sisu or a Be Prepared, then these characters can kind of really help you close out the game as just something that your opponent really can't answer unless they have a sweeper or someone that can challenge ready characters. Another one that I'm actually considering myself to bring to Set Championship just to secure the cards. But yeah, definitely one you should check out, and great job again to Taylor. Here he is on screen showing that he did win. And then next up we have this first place winning list from Clara Sear, who took down the Fist of Ace Games Reign of Jafar Star Championship right here in Montreal. I wanted to feature this list. Clara, obviously a very well-known player in the community, someone who's a really positive influence, but it's also a Chernadog list with a bit of a twist on it, which I'm really excited to talk about. So fundamentally, this is an aggro list all about questing with your characters, but because we have the Lady and the Tramp characters in here, there's a lot of really tricky things that you can do with this. And of course, we do have a lot of the low-cost questers here. We do have 4 copies of Stitch New Dog, and the reason being because this deck also runs 4 copies of Stitch Rockstar, which is really exciting because we know Stitch Rockstar is going to be a card that's getting reprinted, and seeing him do well in a deck list like this gives us a lot of potential excitement for Fabled to be able to do something similar. We also see 2 copies of Huey in this list, a great way of getting out those higher cost characters earlier on, and especially with so many shift lines in this deck, being able to get those characters down sooner, definitely an advantage. In terms of card draw, we have quite a lot in this deck actually, because it can often struggle with card draw because you were traditionally relying mostly on Rapunzel. We also have Tramp Dapper Rascal in this deck list. It was a card I was really excited about, but I think hasn't really had the impact in these lists we would have liked to see in here. But then we do have the additional card draw through Stitch Rockstar. You've got so many low cost characters in this deck, you'll be able to kind of spam those out and get a lot of cards from him. We also have 4 copies of Clarabelle Light on Her Hooves. Again, another really great way to draw cards, especially with this deck where you're kind of really flooding the board as much as possible. So you often do end up with no cards in hand, and then Clarabelle can help you refill. Fantastic looking list, looks like a lot of fun, and great job to Clara. And then the third flavor of Lemon Lime. This is the 10th place list from the Shark Gaming, a 5k from Daniel Saggers, and this is the Sing Together version of this list. And this is a deck that has kind of a strong core from previous decks and has been slowly kind of iterating and trying to find the right recipe for this set. When it comes to characters, one of the new additions in this list are the 3 copies of Chip. I think Chip is a deceptively good card, forcing your opponent to discard, especially if you've been able to set up the Prince John the turn before. But as a 3/2, he can often quite favorably trade as well, and if not, he can just be questing away. So I think Chip does bring a lot to a deck like this that wants to be focusing heavily on the discard. And then 1 copy of Tramp. This is not a deck that necessarily wants to go wide in the early game, but once you've been able to set up your characters, once you've controlled your opponent's board and their hand through the discard and you're under the sea, then Tramp can help you find those last little pieces you need in your deck to be able to get you over the finish line. And then after that, we've got the 4 copies of You Have Forgotten Me, of course, a staple in this deck. It's just a really punishing thing to play on turn 4. When most players have emptied out their hands and are expecting to draw on their subsequent turns, then they can be really punished with a You Have Forgotten Me. And then the song package, 20 songs here, and a lot of these really focusing on reducing your opponent's strength. Things like Painting the Roses Red, Lost in the Woods, putting your opponent's characters into Under the Sea range, and also of course naturally synergizing with the muses as well. Even if you don't have the song in your hand, you could use them to reduce the strength and then bounce the opponent's characters back to their hands. So yeah, lots of fun things in this list if this is the style of play you like. And before we go on to the next deck list, I just want to give a huge shout out to the sponsor of this video, HeavyPlay. HeavyPlay have their equipped mag system, which allows you to connect your deck box to your dice box and your playmat, all with the power of magnets. Makes it super easy to switch tables when you play. They also have their curved sleeves with curved corners, which mean you'll never have a card upside down in your deck again. If you want to get your hands on any HeavyPlay products, you can visit them at heavyplay.com and use the discount code Inkborn10 at checkout to get 10% off your whole order. So we have another really fun deck list up next. This is the 8th place list from Edu at the Grand Lorcana tournament again in Madrid. And this is an Emerald Sapphire list. It's the more discard and tempo oriented list rather than what we were seeing at Worlds with some of the players running the Emerald Sapphire item list. So a lot about just kind of disrupting your opponent and using all of the advantage Sapphire has to leverage that massive ink advantage, and then building toward that Bend to My Will turn where after disrupting your opponent through those early turns with things like the Muses and Mother Knows Best, then you can empty your opponent's hand and then kind of close the game quickly from there. Emerald did get a few nice tools this set that kind of helps with this strategy. Of course, Louis is a card that we had been seeing players making use of, that ability to not only give a character Reckless, which prevents them from questing, but also him entering play and being a 4/3 means that a lot of characters will just basically charge into him and be banished, especially something like a Daisy Duck if you're against an aggro deck and they're going a lot faster than this deck will go, then you can use something like that. But we also see 3 copies of the new 7-cost Basil Undercover Detective. What's really fascinating about Basil is he has 2 very disruptive abilities. The first one, when you play him, you can return a chosen character to their player's hand. We know that's a very powerful ability to kind of out-tempo your opponent. And then the second ability, whenever he quests, chosen opponent discards a card at random. So it's kind of really attacking your opponent on the 2 different axes this deck wants to, which is by kind of bouncing characters back to hand, but then also through that discard strategy as well. So a card that I think we'll see probably a lot more success post-rotation, but nice to see him doing well in this list. A lot of other disruption tools in here as well. Obviously, I mentioned the Muses has nice synergy with all of the songs in this deck, and there are 15, so you're often going to be able to make use of their ability. But also 2 copies of John Silver, a card that really fits into that Emerald disruption strategy, giving your opponent Reckless. And especially in a deck where you have Sapphire and you can get to him a lot sooner, then he becomes a lot more formidable in this list. So yeah, very interesting list. It's always nice to see these more rogue decks doing well at a 325 player tournament. Being able to take top 8 with something like this is really fantastic, and I'm sure nobody expected it when they sat down against Edu in this tournament. Something a little more traditional. This is the first of 3 Amethyst Emerald lists we're looking at. Amethyst Emerald, another one of those deck lists that has kind of, another one of those ink combinations that has kind of diverged into a few different archetypes, which we love to see here. So this is the best performing one from this weekend in those 2 big tournaments. It's the 2nd place list from Lorcana JRP at the tournament in Madrid, and this is the more discard leaning version of the deck list. We can tell that by the presence of all of the Diablos, so many Diablos in these decks in order to set up that shift target with the Diablo Devoted Herald, but also the 3 copies of Prince John in there. This is just another deck that's going to be attacking your opponent on those 2 axes, the first making them discard cards and leveraging that to your advantage, but then also using your very well statted Amethyst cards to be able to get rid of their characters in the process as well. And as is typical, one of the things this in combination unlocks is the pull the lever and wrong lever combo, which is just some of the most efficient removal in the game. Wrong lever giving you that nice synergy with your Prince John, because you're not only able to force your opponent to discard, you also get this into your discard pile, so allowing you to draw and then potentially setting up pull the lever on subsequent turns. So yeah, really good looking list here, building on and refining what we've come to expect out of this archetype. The next one we're looking at is this 4th place list from Zachary Massenet from the Sharp Gaming 5K, and this is the more aggro / tempo version of this list, and actually quite a bit more aggressive than we've seen from these decks as of late. The inclusion of the Curse Merfolk and Flynn Rider just giving you that early game lore pressure which your opponent has to answer, and also both of those cards also forcing your opponent to discard if they don't have removal for them, so a lot of pressure there. And then toward the mid game we have the aggressive questers with things like Genie, which is also replacing himself when you play him. You've got the reach cards in Merlin Goat, allowing you to close the game out that way as well. And then toward the top end of this deck, actually quite a lot of different removal options and different disruption tools depending on what you're coming up against. Belle, Accomplished Mystic, is a card that's making her way back into a lot of Amethyst lists just because Rhino is in the metagame. She's a very efficient way of dealing with Rhino if you're able to set that up. And also a card your opponent has to play around if they know she's in the deck. We've got the 3 copies of Elsa, who's really just a staple in Amethyst decks at this point. 1 Cricky, allowing you to do some more favorable trades if you set him up, and also 2 copies of Ursula Sea Witch Queen. There's so much Amber Steel songs, so many songs in the metagame at the moment. Ursula is just a fantastic way to shut them down, but also allowing you to exert an opponent character, which will help you take them out as well. And then the final list we're looking at is the 7th place list from Moyen of Lorcana, also at the Madverse event. And this is definitely leaning more toward the discard version, but there are a lot of disruption tools in here as well. So we have the 2 copies of the Muses, really good into aggro matchups and into Steel Song, where you have a lot of low strength characters you can bounce back. and they pair so nicely with things like Heffalumps and Woozles as well, which can be used to prevent one character from questing and then also returning a character to hand. Moyen also including 3 copies of Ursula Mad Sea Witch, a great card on her own, can help you make some very favorable trades, but also another shift target for that Ursula Sea Witch Queen, which is going to be kind of critical toward the later part of the game. Conspicuously absent from this list is Pull the Lever and Wrong Lever, but obviously Moyen, feeling he had enough other ways to deal with his opponent's cards with this list, and no doubt he'll be talking about this list in detail on the next Podcorner episode, so check that out if you're curious about this one. Next, we're looking at this Ruby Sapphire list that took 3rd place from Matteo at the Grand Lorcana tournament, and this is the Maui Shark burn version of the list. It's a very well refined list at this point, but there is still some things in here that are quite interesting. The plan with a deck list like this, of course, is just to get as much ink as you can early on in order to get your Maui Half Shark out as soon as possible, because it just puts so much pressure on your opponent, who then is kind of forced into a stalled board because they really don't want Maui to be eating up their stuff. But this deck also mixing in a little bit of extra removal, so we have the 2 copies of Sisu Empowered Sibling, which is a card that these decks kind of add and take out as the meta dictates, but also 2 copies of Maleficent Monstrous Dragon. I think she's most effective when your opponent's just not expecting her to be coming out on turn 9, but she is a 7/5 questing for 2, so a lore threat there. But yeah, just a great way and a clean way, I should say, of removing your opponent's threat, so that's really interesting to see. After that, all of the kind of same actions we've seen. We've got the Develop Your Brain to help you find the pieces you need, the visions of the future, and then of course the Sell the Azurite Seed there alongside Tipo to help you gain your early ink. And then Matteo taking a cue from the champion himself, from DKP, with that 1 copy of Merlin's Carpet Bag. Again, I feel like it's definitely a card you can underestimate, but once your opponent is able to set it up and then can just infinitely recycle popsicles to help them draw through their deck, it really can be a very powerful draw engine in a deck like this. So great job to Matteo for taking 3rd place at that huge tournament. Next, we have this 4th place list from Vasco, also at the Grand Lorcana tournament. This is Amethyst Steel. Once again, in ink decks, there isn't really a nuance, or there isn't enough of a nuance between the different versions of Amethyst Steel, but I do think there is kind of the more mid-range version, which is this one we're looking at, and a slightly more aggressive-leaning version, which is going to be the one we look at next. But in terms of this list, it's doing exactly what Amethyst Steel wants to be doing. It's playing those 1-cost characters that can replace themselves to kind of add that early lore pressure, but also the option to draw a card in most cases as well. This player is running 2 copies of Dump Truck. We've seen Dump Truck kind of showing up in lists like this, largely as a tech against Rhino, because if you're able to put the 1 damage on the small Rhino, then when the big Rhino shifts onto him, he no longer has that resist +2. So definitely a smart inclusion there if you're expecting to see Amber Steel. Toward the mid game, we have the things we would expect to see. We've got Calhoun. If your opponent is playing to the board, then you can use her to take them down. You've also got Smee as well, just another really good quester. Reach cards in Giant Cobra and Merlin to help you close out the game, and Pete there to stop your opponent playing actions, especially when you can bring him back with your Madam Mim foxes and snakes. Then he can become a real menace and really lock a lot of different decks out of the match. And then when it comes to removals, so this player is including 2 copies of Fire the Cannons and 2 copies of Smash. Actually, Smash is a card you don't see often in these lists. Players will choose to run something like Let the Storm Rage on instead, but perhaps Smash is a good way to get through Rhino. It can not be swiped by Ursula, so it does have a lot of utility. And then also Strength for Raging Fire, just a staple really at this point in Steel lists. And 2 copies of Along Kim Zeus, great at dealing with the Maui Half Sharks, great at dealing with Rhinos, so it has a lot of options and a lot of utility in a list like this. And then next we're looking at this 6th place list from Landon Weber from the Sharp Gaming 5K, and this including a lot of very similar cards but a little bit more aggressively slanted. Because of that, we see the 2 copies of Maleficent biding her time in the 1-cost slot to apply that early lore pressure, 4 Giant Cobras, 4 White Roses, 4 Merlin Goats, a lot of reach cards against those control decks. Or just where you need that extra little bit of lore to get you across the finish line. And a lot less removal in this deck. 3 copies of Fire the Cannon and 4 copies of Strength of a Raging Fire. So depending on your playstyle, you have these 2 very different versions of the list, and likely going to be a meta call, but also which you prefer to play. So next we're looking at this list, and my dog Dwight has decided to join us for this. This is Amethyst Sapphire, and this is an 11th place list from Ruben, also at the Grand Lorcana tournament. Of course, Amethyst Steel, definitely a popular deck. We've seen that with the meta breakdown, but not actually. So my other dog Heisenberg is also here. It's not a deck that has necessarily been putting up as good of results in tournaments, and largely I would imagine because of the presence of Amber Steel. But if you do fancy playing an Amethyst Sapphire list, then this could be a good pick for you. At this stage in the metagame, the core of Amethyst Sapphire is really well defined, and the play lines and the strategy of a deck like this is quite straightforward. It's going to be controlling the board with your well-statted characters in the early game, drawing as many cards as you can to kind of leverage that card advantage against your opponent. Ruben has included 2 copies of Diablo. A lot of players really just opting to have the 4 copies of Popsicle in these lists, but I think actually having those extra couple of 1-drops can be quite useful. You don't really want to be drawing them later in the game, but in that early game, if you do have them, it gives you a little bit more consistency. With something like your Merlin Crab in this deck list, then you can beef up your Diablo to be a 3 strength, which can be very useful early game, and also can give you a card as well. Like we saw in some of the other Amethyst lists, we have 3 copies of Bell Accomplished Mystic. Because you're already running the Bell Apprentice Inventor in this list, it of course makes sense to have the Floodborn version there as well. But she does have that really great ability to be able to take care of the Rhinos, which are just running wild in the metagame. We know how many Amber Steel decks there are out there, so definitely a good choice. 2 copies of Cusco. He can take out locations, he can take out items. With the Ruby Sapphire lists using the Merlin's Carpet Bag to kind of continuously recur popsicles, he is a great way to help you deal with that. It's great in the mirror match. I just think a very good card to include, and a 3/5 that quests for 2, and has the second ability to give your characters resist 1, so a lot of really good things there. In terms of removal, you've got the 4 copies of Hades, which is really a staple in these lists at this point, and also Monstro as well. Again, because you've got that really big card advantage often in these matchups, you're able to sacrifice those to be able to use your Monstro to take down your opponent's threat. But he can also be great in Amber Steel matchups, which tended to be the most difficult ones for this deck to navigate. But now your opponent can't just sing Whole New World and exert all of their characters, because you'll often be able to rush in your Monstro and take them out. And then the last deck list we're looking at is this list from Christina, who took top 32 at the Grand Lorcana tournament, and this is a hyper aggro Amethyst Amber list. This was actually sent in to us, and we did want to showcase this deck list just because it is a really massive tournament, and it's always a great achievement, and it's nice to see someone doing it with a hyper aggro list as well, especially into a field with so much Amber Steel. And if you are a fan of hyper aggro, this could definitely be a good pick to take to your set championships. We've got access to all of the aggressive questers with Amber and Amethyst, so the Daisies, the Lilos, the Maleficents, and so many more. Christina also including Wendy Darling and Maleficent to give you some more 2 lore questers in the 2-cost slot, which synergize really nicely with Lady Family Dog because they're more characters for you to be able to play. And then because of course hyper aggro decks can be very fragile, we have got a lot of reach cards in this deck. We've got the Honey Maron, who is often almost always going to be giving you some lore. We've got the White Rose and Merlin Goat, so you can actually play these lore gaining characters on 2, 3, and 4, but they're going to be great ways to help you close out the game. We've got Gathering Knowledge and Wisdom, just another way to get that surprise burst of lore against your opponent. And 3 copies of Friends on the other side, because these decks can run out of steam. A really good idea to include something like that, especially when almost half of the characters in this deck are able to sing it as well. So a great job to Christina on this performance. You should be super proud of yourself. So that's it for the meta report this week. Say goodbye to Dwight because he's about to disappear. And sorry for not posting these videos more frequently. I mentioned it in a previous video, but we're in the process of selling our house at the moment. It's been a lot of stress. It's taking a lot of our time, so it's not always possible to sit down and record a meta report. But we do always post the weekly meta report on our Instagram, even if we're not able to make a video for you. And of course, if you did enjoy this video, please be sure to hit the like button as it does help us out, and subscribe not only for future meta reports, but also we have Fabled reveal season starting very soon indeed, so we'll have all the coverage and news coming out of that. Remember as well to check out the sponsors of today's video, HeavyPlay, if you want to get your hands on any of those products. And remember to use the discount code Inkborn10 at checkout to get 10% off your whole order. And the last thing to say is thanks to our YouTube members for all of the support, including our newest member, Benjamin Lemon. We really appreciate you. So thank you so much for the support. If you're interested in becoming a YouTube member or just finding out more information, you can hit the join button down below to get all of the details. And with that said, until the next one, happy questing.